Hello, and thank you for joining me. Jesus operated outside the box of religious orthodoxy. Now, he wasn't a Protestant. He was not a Protestant. He was not a religious reformer. He did refuse to be bound by man-made religious constructs. He could not work within the restrictive religious system of Judaism. He didn't try to drive the proverbial square peg into the round hole. Jesus was independent, as those who commit themselves to let the Bible say what it says generally must be. Now, in chapter 5 of his gospel, Luke gives his account of the Lord's summons or call to the publican, the tax collector Levi. Matthew, the Lord's call of Matthew to discipleship service. In verse 27, we read that Jesus authoritatively summoned Matthew to follow him as a disciple. Follow me. The Lord didn't beg or say please. And then clearly the Holy Spirit had been working ahead in Matthew's heart and life, preparing him for this call, because we read that Matthew immediately he left all, rose up and followed Jesus. Now, Matthew's summons to a higher level of service was an indescribable honor to him, and so he celebrated his selection by the Lord with a big going away party, to which he invited his former associates and Jesus and his disciples as well. So there was celebration, there was eating and drinking, and so you have people letting their hair down and having a good time. But there were some religious people who were watching this, and so the joy and the freedom that they saw, they had a problem with these things. So religious scribes and Pharisees, they complained against Jesus and his disciples, and so they asked the question, why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners? Luke chapter 5, verse 31 and 32, Jesus answered and said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Jesus, he was the friend of sinners, and I'm glad. And as somebody used to say, I'm glad because I are one. Now, the words of the Lord, they were a rebuke to those men and their self-righteous attitude, as well as their failure to in their spiritual responsibilities to provide counsel and spiritual help and guidance to the spiritually ill. Now, verse 33, they went on, they said to him, why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise those of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink? Now, Matthew, in his account, this Matthew chapter 9, he put the question into the mouths of the disciples of John the Baptist. Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast? Mark, in his record, this is in chapter 2, informs us that the disciples of John and the Pharisees were fasting. So this was not only their common practice, but whatever day of the week or time it was, Levi's party, Matthew's party occurred. Evidently, it was a time of fasting for John's disciples and the Pharisees. So, these guys would have been hungry, and no doubt they were envious. So, though the Old Testament required Jews to fast only one day a year on the Day of Atonement, the more religious Jews added to this. The Pharisees fasted 2 days a week. John's disciples, John the Baptist's disciples, regularly fasted, probably twice a week also. But again, the law of God did not require this. This was something that had been added. So the self-denial, the discomfort, the inconvenience involved in the fasting became like a badge of holiness to many of these guys. So similar thing is involved with the matter of 2 service Sundays. Now, if people legitimately want to meet for a second service on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, That's a great thing. But often the practice is not really about spiritual edification. It's more about people scoring points for somehow, in their thinking, suffering for Jesus. So the practice, one thing the practice does is it ends up putting an unnecessary burden on elderly church members. John's disciples and the Pharisees had a problem with Jesus' disciples' liberty. So the fact that the Lord's disciples had the freedom to eat and drink and enjoy life was, to the thinking of these religious guys, well, this is unfair to us. Now, go back to the second service Sunday, and there are people that they think that, well, if they would be honest, they think it's unfair that we have to come back down here a second time on Sunday while those other old people laying out of church, they don't have a second Sunday, and they get to enjoy time with their family. So it is not fair to us. The Lord's answer to the question of John's disciples is recorded. Luke records it in Luke chapter 5, verse 34 and 35. He said to them, "Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days." So, to put this teaching into a nutshell, Jesus taught there are occasions when fasting is the natural thing to do, and then there are occasions when joy and celebration and eating and drinking and having a good time and laughing, there are occasions when these things are natural. So the teaching boils down to this: hey, let the activity meet or match the occasion. The Lord further illustrated here with a two-phase parable. Jesus used what were normal activities in the time and culture in which he operated to illustrate why he could not operate within the system of Judaism. So obviously that was a question that people had. So I'm going to read Luke chapter 5, verses 36 through 39. Then he spoke a parable to them. So we have the context. Then he spoke a parable to them. "No one puts a piece from a new garment on an old one, otherwise the new makes a tear, and also the piece that was taken out of the new does not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst the wineskins and be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined." So it'd be the loss of the wine and the skins both. "But," verse 38, "new wine must be put into new wineskins, and both are preserved." And I like this. "And no one having drunk old wine immediately desires new, for he says the old is better." So what the Lord was saying is, there are people that when they hear teachings that are new to them, they don't always accept them at first. But if the truth, assuming one speaks the truth to them, the truth resonates with them, and they think about it, and eventually they come around, okay. But the natural tendency is to say, you know what, I'm going to stick with what I know right now. Okay, so the parable teaches about things that are incompatible. That's the idea we want in our minds. Things that are incompatible, things that when mixed together predictably produce deleterious results. It was common knowledge and common sense that one did not cover or repair a tear in an old garment with a piece from a new garment. So for one thing, one mars a new garment by taking a piece from it, and then the piece from the new does not match with the old. We call this a mismatch. And also the first time you wash the garment, when the new patch, let's say, it gets wet and then it dries, well, naturally it's going to shrink and it pulls away from the old cloth, pulls away, and the tear is made worse. The original problem is made worse. Now, additionally, no one, Jesus said, put new wine, unfermented wine, into old used wineskins. Again, this was common knowledge. It was a common sense thing among the people. So a wineskin, we're talking about an animal skin that was prepared, and it was sewn up and used as a container for liquid, maybe water or milk, or in this case, for wine. Now, one could put new wine. We're talking about unfermented wine. One could put new wine into a new wineskin. And this is because a new wineskin could stretch to accommodate the expansion of gases that occurred during the fermentation process. Now, an old wineskin in which new wine had been stored and fermentation had occurred, and it had been, the old wineskin had been stretched by the expansion of gases. An old wineskin could not accommodate new wine and further process of fermentation. So the former process, the fermentation process, had taken much of the stretch out of the old wineskin. So the expansion of the fermentation, when the new wine, the fermentation process occurred, the expansion of the gases would burst an old wineskin. And so both the skin and the wine would be destroyed. So what's this about? Well, Jesus illustrated why he could not operate within the confines of Judaism. His teachings and the Jewish religious system had become incompatible. Legalistic Judaism was too rigid and could not stretch, if you will, to receive the liberating teachings of the Lord. Though Judaism should have naturally flowered into Christianity, it had been turned into something that God never intended it to be. Now, not everything about Judaism, not everything about the Jews' religion was bad, but to try to impose Christianity onto Judaism, to try to force change, would predictably end up having a deleterious impact on both Christianity and whatever good elements there were in Judaism. Now, there are multiple applications, I suppose, to this study. Not every child of God is teachable. Some individuals and churches are not teachable. They're invested in their system, and they're determined to cling to their religious traditions, and they refuse to change. So a minister of the Word, he might have a treasure of biblical information that he just wants to pour out and share with people, but in some instances, to try to do so would result in, let's call it, a train wreck. So there are religious people and there are churches with which a Bible teacher, simply cannot work. He can work with and teach those who can receive the good information that he has. But not everybody is this way. Not everybody is teachable. And so from some people, a man simply has to walk away. And that's what the Lord did. Now, he was never mean, but there were times that he just had to walk away and leave people alone. And so that's one application for this lesson. But again, Jesus explained the natural question, well, Jesus, why don't you try to work within the confines of the Jews' religious system? And the basic teaching here, what he said, I can't do it. It would result in great damage. So I hope this lesson you find helpful and informative. And hey, if you have any comments on it, have any questions, ask them in the comments section. I'll check it, and I would really like that. So thanks for joining me, and the Lord bless you. And Take care.